This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only.
Following is an original production of Link TV. Al Jazeera TV looks back in history and decides to start calling this the sixth war between Arabs and Israel. We'll analyze this and the latest Middle Eastern television reports and answer your questions in this live call-in program, Mosaic Special Report. Insight into the Middle East.
Hello and welcome to this Mosaic Special Report. I'm Stewart Cheifet. We're now more than 2 weeks into the current conflict in the Middle East with no apparent prospects for a peaceful resolution. There has been wall-to-wall television coverage of the problems in Israel, Lebanon, and Gaza, but the focus has been more on heat than on light. What we hope to do here tonight is shed some light on the conflict, help you understand the history, the context, the background, the participants, and the possible paths for peace in the future. Here to help me do that is a panel of folks who know a lot about this part of the world. They are here to answer your questions and help us all better understand the root causes of this conflict. First, Link TV's Middle East media analyst, Jamal Dajani. He's also producer of Mosaic, World News from the Middle East, the program you will be seeing here in just 30 minutes. Also joining us is Amichai Magen. He is currently a Fulbright scholar at Stanford. He is a former policy advisor to the Israeli government and was a participant in the Camp David peace process. Also with us tonight is Ramiz Rafeedie. He is an attorney practicing in San Francisco. He is also president of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee here in Northern California. In this program, we will be answering your questions, so please call or email us with your questions. The phone number to call is 866-848-0831. Our email address for your questions, live@linktv.org. Gentlemen, I just want to talk about a couple of late developments that have happened this afternoon and get your reaction. And Jamal, let me start with you. There's a story just ran online a little while ago that Iranian volunteers are now trying to move through Turkey to get into Lebanon to join what they're saying is the holy war against Israel. Is this a first step toward a wider war, or is it just a bunch of people not associated with the government, you think?
Well, you always have this reaction, always in Iran, even volunteers parading to liberate Palestine or the March to Jerusalem. But I don't think it is a government sanctioned. It's maybe a veiled message that we're going to open the borders and we're going to go to the aid of the Lebanese, because, you know, the Iranians and Ahmadinejad, the spotlight has been taken away from him a little bit, because now it's Hassan Nasrallah, so he wants to be the savior of the Ummah, the Muslim nation. And I don't read too much into it as the larger regional war that everyone seems to be egging to happen soon.
What do you think, Ramiz? Are you concerned about a wider war here with more parties?
I mean, I'm not at this moment, but I do believe that the issue of Palestine and Lebanon galvanizes both the Arab and Muslim populations around the world. I mean, people really feel passionately about this. They really feel strongly that what's happening in both Palestine and Lebanon is a horrific injustice. So it has galvanized the masses to a large degree, something that we haven't seen in several years.
Amichai, you think the war is bigger now than Israel had anticipated when it started?
Well, first of all, I hope that these reports that are emanating from Iran are A, not true, and B, are not sanctioned by the Iranian government. I think it would be an extremely dangerous escalation at this point for any kind of move on the part of Iran or Syria to pour additional fuel onto the fire. While in the last 48 hours, we've seen Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice intense European and Israeli and Lebanese diplomacy to try to contain the violence and try to reach a speedy diplomatic solution. So I very much hope that we all together as the international community can contain this problem. I think that the Arab regimes, the moderate Arab regimes in the region, have a strong interest in doing that. I think Saudi Arabia has spoken in those terms. Egypt has spoken in those terms. Jordan has spoken in those terms, and I very much hope that we adhere to that message of moderation.
You mentioned Secretary of State Rice, and there was another story just ran about an hour ago on Time Magazine's website saying Condoleezza Rice in diplomatic Disneyland. saying what Time views as some really absurd statements, apparently in Beirut, in talking to the people about the horrible destruction going on there. She said, quote, "These are simply the birth pangs of a new Middle East." Is she out of touch, you think?
I do believe that's the case, and there has been some type of sort of fantasy absurdity to all this. You mentioned this Disney metaphor. It's true. I mean, on the one hand, we have the international community, nearly every country in the world, asking for an immediate ceasefire in this region. On the other side of the fence, there's Israel and the United States, not wanting an immediate ceasefire. The rest of the world wants an immediate ceasefire. The United States keeps the green light going, and in fact supplies Israel with thousands of smart bombs, immediate shipment of smart bombs to intensify the conflict. If there's something inherently illogical about the Condoleezza Rice going there and talking about the destruction of Lebanon and at the same time supplying Israel with the means to continue to destroy Lebanon.
How is that going to happen when you don't have the main players participating in this conflict? And this is what I've been reading recently, like in the conference that happened in Rome. You don't have Hezbollah, you don't have their benefactor, Iran. And how would you suggest to enforce a ceasefire when Hezbollah is not, brought forward into the negotiation table?
I mean, I'm sorry. I think that's an important question, and we need to have the main stakeholders obviously around the table in order to make headway. I just want to touch on a point that Ramiz raised, which is the sort of the apparent contradiction, or the prima facie contradiction between Secretary of State's statements in Beirut and the supply of these accurate bunker busting bombs. Look, the accusation against Israel and by proxy the United States has been that Israel was is somehow irresponsible, overreacted, and there's been some ugly accusations against Israel that Israel has in fact not taken every step that it possibly could to minimize civilian casualties. I think that one could and should think about the Israeli request for more precise munitions as an attempt to respond to that and to acquire munitions that would allow it to root out Hezbollah bunkers where many rockets are being hidden, many times under civilian buildings and infrastructure. And so I don't see that there is an inherent contradiction between the diplomatic move on the one hand and the provision of these more precise munitions on the other. I think it's interesting that Israel a few months ago refused accepting munitions, these types of munitions from America, because Israel has been developing for some time its own munitions and did not want to create the dependence. So I think the reason why we see now the request for these more precise munitions is an Israeli attempt to minimize civilian casualties rather than to exacerbate them in any way.
But Amichai, Israel prides itself with its intelligence capabilities, and I, as a journalist, have been watching the news, been monitoring all the devastation and destruction in that security zone in southern Beirut. Certainly, you cannot say that Israel has exercised its utmost to minimize the civilian casualty. I mean, they had international observers there, they had reporters, and we're looking at footage of entire blocks being destroyed. And I've walked through these streets, and I know the thousands of civilians live there. So how would that be possible for Israel to avoid or minimize the civilian casualty? Because the reporters now are describing it as the war of cities now. You know, the Hezbollah, they're lobbing the Katyushas at civilian population, but Israel's been, from the numbers we've been seeing, hitting a lot of civilians.
Jamal, if I could just respond to that.
Yes, go ahead.
These weapons that are being sent to Israel is to replenish the Israeli weaponry that they now have. They already had these smart bombs. In fact, they dropped 23 tons of these smart bombs on a mosque a renovated mosque in downtown Beirut. They have to know, no matter how precise, no matter how smart their bombs are, that they are going to have civilian casualties. And they have operated with a callous disregard for civilian casualties, not only in Lebanon, but also in Gaza, one of the most densely populated areas, which has heavy civilian casualties. Just on a statistical level, the amount of civilians being killed in Lebanon is outrageous and should be condemned. The amount of civilians being killed in Gaza is outrageous, and this is with U.S.-supplied weaponry.
What about the attacks on the Israeli civilians in Haifa?
Look, at the language of equivalence in this matter is just simply inappropriate. We have the fourth or fifth most powerful military in the world, a nuclear power in Israel, bombing basically a tiny and defenseless country in Lebanon, and the most densely populated defenseless people in Gaza. They are responding in Gaza and Lebanon with World War II vintage Katyusha rockets, which create minimal damage, and with homemade rockets from Gaza. There can be no comparison to Israel's military might and what they're facing.
Briefly, Amichai, respond.
I'd like to respond to that, because I think this is a very bizarre statement, and one that I'd like to address because I have some personal experience with this. I, like most Israelis of my age, served in the Israeli army. In fact, I was a legal affairs officer in Gaza, and I can tell you with my hand on my heart that the Israeli army takes every possible precaution to try to avoid civilian casualties. We value human life. The values upon which Israelis are brought up, the values of an open society, the values of the sanctity of human life, and we take every conceivable step to prevent loss of civilian life. The problem is that both in Gaza and now in Lebanon, Israel is being put in an impossible situation. And I think it's fair to compare Israel not to some kind of utopian ideal where no war occurs. War is horrible. It's horrific. It kills innocent people on both sides. And I deeply pain and regret the loss of any civilian innocent life, both on the Lebanese side and the Israeli side, whether it's Christian, Jew, or Muslim, equally. Each human life is unique and precious. What does not exist here is a state of moral symmetry, and I beg to disagree with my friend. Whereas Israel maximizes its efforts to minimize civilian casualties, Hezbollah maximizes its efforts to maximize them, to create as much havoc and to kill as many women and children in Israel as it possibly can. And on top of that, it is not illegal under the laws of war to take defensive action. It is not illegal to knock out your enemy's infrastructure and military capabilities. And it is, unfortunately, the reality of war, and any army will say this to you, the American army, the British army, and NATO, etc., the finest armies in the world. It is impossible to fight the kind of enemy that Hezbollah is without some damage to the civilian population. But I am confident that the Israeli army, from my own personal experience and knowing the people who are at the helm, is doing everything that it can to minimize civilian casualties, while Hezbollah is doing, and Hamas is doing everything that they can to maximize civilian casualties. Right. And that's the difference.
I want to change the subject for just a moment and focus on some of the media attention that this war has had for the last couple of weeks. We discussed that briefly at the beginning of the program in reference to the Mosaic show. For 15 days, I guess, this crisis has been dominating American and European television newscasts also. So we tried to compare news coverage here and across the Atlantic to see if there's a difference in emphasis. We're going to start with a look at BBC coverage in England.
Civilians bear the brunt of Israeli airstrikes. Nearly a third of those killed or wounded in Lebanon have been children.
The BBC was given access to Hezbollah-controlled areas of South Lebanon, and it focused on casualties and Israeli accountability.
This place is also Hezbollah's nerve center. They give the orders here, and we arrived at their invitation. Israel says they made their military plans here. But this was also a noisy, overcrowded district of Beirut where thousands of people lived and worked. Israel needs to prove it has fulfilled its obligation under the laws of war to make sure that the damage it causes is in proportion to the threat it faces.
It's NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
In the U.S., NBC News often began its reports by focusing on Israeli military strategy.
The Israeli army massing near the Lebanon border. Tanks, troops, armored personnel carriers, bulldozers. Israel's invasion force is taking shape close to the Lebanon border.
On Sunday, most European news programs, from Russia Today to the BBC, led with a blunt quote from the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator, Jan Egeland.
Speaking in Beirut, the UN humanitarian chief calls the destruction in the country horrific and a violation of humanitarian law.
Israel's bombing of a crowded Beirut neighborhood is a breach of humanitarian law. It's horrific, said top UN official Jan Egeland as he toured a Beirut suburb.
I would say that this seems to me an excessive use of force in an area with so many civilians. If it's an excessive use of force, that makes it a war crime. It makes it a violation of humanitarian law.
But in the U.S., Egeland's quote was downplayed.
The UN's relief administrator touring Lebanon warned a disproportionate response by Israel here violates international law, after earlier simply saying, in this war, both sides are wrong.
It has to stop. The whole thing has to stop. This is no natural disaster. This is a man-made crisis.
Or his criticism was ignored altogether.
Today, the UN criticized Hezbollah for launching rockets from civilian areas, but also called Israel's response disproportionate.
If it continues like this, there will just be more and more civilian casualties, more and more dead children, more and more wounded children struggling to save their lives.
Jamal, you've been watching television news coverage from around the world for the last 2 weeks. As a journalist, give us your analysis. How good is it, and is there bias depending on where in the world you are?
Well, I mean, I've been monitoring television, American television, mostly CNN, Fox, versus 20 and more satellite different stations in the Middle East. The coverage varies from area to area, even within the Middle East, even within the Lebanese networks. You have over 5 different networks.
Varies how? Explain.
It varies, in the narration. As soon as the news broke about the Israel responding to Hezbollah, many networks took the line of the Saudi line, the Egyptian and the Jordanians, in that sense that they put the blame on Hezbollah, which is unprecedented and unusual. And then later on, the tone has changed. And, comparing it with what's going on in the United States, we have a lot of hype going on. I'm watching, 2 different wars, how the Arab networks are providing the coverage versus all these superstar anchors parachuting into the area with no or very little knowledge of the area, and making very short reports, and sometimes I feel the cameras are just shining on them rather than the story. So, it's really different where you're looking at the lens.
Let me ask our guests, but I want to start with you, Ramiz. What is your view of U.S. television coverage of this war?
Well, unfortunately, it's not very critical of Israeli representations. They seem to parrot Israeli statements and Israeli representations, even to the absurd result that there are some news outlets saying that, or repeating the Israeli phrase that Israeli civilians are hiding Katyusha rockets underneath their beds. And these are enormous Katyusha rockets. But the Israelis are...
You mean Lebanese? Or
the Lebanese civilians. I'm sorry, the Lebanese civilians.
Okay.
The media has done a fine job of insulating Israel from any harsh criticism in this country. Now, European media outlets tend to be more critical of the things, but there's just so many civilian casualties that you can't really overlook it anymore.
Amichai, you saw that BBC report. What was your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction was to remember coverage of the infamous Jenin incidents a few years ago in 2002, where again Israel was accused of every crime on the planet, and they were terrible photos taken, and Israel was condemned by various NGOs, and the BBC and others rushed in to call this a massacre and to use some very, very inflammatory language, which ended up being completely wrong. And in fact, several European media outlets have had to apologize to Israel subsequently for reporting wrongly in that situation. Now, are we seeing the same type of phenomena happening here? I don't know. I don't think that we have enough information.
Olmert is already complaining about this, by the way. I mean, Prime Minister Olmert is already saying that the European coverage is very biased and very skewed.
I wasn't aware of that complaint, but we do have a long and painful history of various media outlets rushing to condemn Israel and to jump to conclusions before all the facts are in, and before they can pursue investigative journalism.
Gentlemen, I want to get some of our viewers involved. We've got lots of people waiting with questions. I think we have Steve on the line in Utah. What's your question, Steve? Go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering, I'm a 100% committed atheist, and never before in the history of our nation, or the world for that matter, have we ever organized a group to fly into office towers to cause an inquisition, to cause crusades or anything else. Why can't we come out and declare this war for what it really is? It's a war between different faiths that cannot be proved one way or another, and until somebody can sit down on a roundtable discussion and prove their religious beliefs one way or another, this is never going to be solved.
All right, thank you. Ramiz, let me start with you. Is this really the religious war?
Absolutely not. I mean, Jews, and I'm sure my co-guest will agree with this, Jews living in the Middle East before the advent or the introduction of Zionism in the Middle East lived at peace with their Muslim neighbors, their Muslim and Christian Arab neighbors. Of course, Christian Europe is the largest Jewish graveyard in the world. Muslims had guaranteed Jews living in the Arab world prior to the advent of Zionism rights, equality, and other rights that they were granted to Christian Arabs as well. It was only after the advent of Zionism, only after the creation of Israel, which meant the expulsion of the Palestinian population from that area, did there become friction in that area. And that's what the conflict is about. This is not a religious conflict dating back thousands of years. This is a very modern conflict with a very easy solution.
So is this 1948 and on, Amichai? Do you agree?
No. First of all, I want to completely agree with my friend Ramiz. This is not a religious war. There are those who would like to turn it into a religious war, and I think that it's all of our responsibility, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, to prevent that. Jews have lived since the destruction of the Second Temple, the end of Jewish sovereignty 2,000 years ago, have indeed lived in various parts of the Middle East, of North Africa. In fact, they've lived in places like Iran and Iraq and Syria before the rise of Islam in the 7th century. Under Islam, they lived many times at peace and in greater peace with their Muslim neighbors than they've done in Europe.
So what is it about then, Amichai? It's not religion, what is it?
Well, I wanted to just touch on the point that Ramiz made about the rise of Zionism somehow being responsible for this, and I think this is wrong, and it is peculiar. It is true that Jews have lived in the Middle East for many hundreds of years, sometimes in peace and sometimes under persecution. They were never equal citizens. They always lived under the dhimmi. They always had to build their houses to be lower than those of Muslims. They always had to, if a Muslim would ride a horse, then they would have to ride a donkey because the Jew couldn't be higher than the Muslim. So they were always second-class citizens in the Middle East.
But you use the word always. Can you qualify the word always? I mean, we're talking about a large chunk of history. I mean, you say always.
Yeah, we are talking about a large chunk of history. and we're talking about a large territory of land.
Because just to remind you, the Ottomans were in the region, and the people that lived in Bilad al-Sham, the greater Syria, they were also second-class citizens because the Turks wanted the Arabs to speak Turkish and not drop their culture and so forth. So there were different periods where someone somewhere out there was discriminated against.
Well, Jews, surprisingly enough, like all other freedom-loving people in the world, want to live full lives, want self-determination. And that is why they've sought for many, many hundreds of years to return to Jerusalem, to return to Israel, and to live as free people. Let's not forget that the majority today of the population living in the state of Israel today did not come from Europe. The majority of the population living in Israel today are in fact the descendants of Jews who were many times forcefully evicted from Arab and North African countries and who found refuge in Israel.
I want to move on to another caller's question, if we could, please. I think we have Douglas on the line in New Jersey. What's your question, Douglas?
Okay. How you all doing? Good?
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead. Give us your question.
My question is, first of all, I just want to draw reference to a speech made by the last emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, to the League of Nations. He said that until the philosophy that make one race superior and the other inferior, the hope of lasting peace will only be an illusion. Now my question is, why is it that it's okay by America to arm Israel, and then it's totally wrong and terroristic for Iran or Syria to supply arms to the Abbas?
All right, let's start briefly with you, Amichai, and then we'll go to Ramiz.
Well, I think that it has a lot to do with the nature of the regime. Israel is a liberal democracy. It is a steadfast ally of the United States. It's been a steadfast ally of the United States for many, many decades throughout the Cold War. I think that people in the United States understand today more than they've done in the past that democracies make good allies and that dictatorships don't. You can also trust Israel to behave responsibly. My friend mentioned the issue of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, I pray for the day when nuclear weapons disappear from this world. But to make the equivalence between the possession of a nuclear weapon on the one side by an ally like Britain or like France or like Israel, and on the other hand by rogue regimes, regimes that are state supporters of terrorism, such as Syria and Iran, it's a totally different issue.
Right, let's go to Ramiz. Do you see a double standard here, Ramiz?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have a lot of talk about who is supplying Hezbollah. Is it Iran? Is it Syria? But we know, the Arabs know, who exactly is supplying Israel. And I just would want to tell other Americans that the supplying of Israel and the atrocities that it's committing will have far-reaching consequences for the United States. This may be taking place in the Middle East, but the repercussions may be felt at home.
Explain what you mean.
In terms of foreign policy, any foreign policy ventures that the United States would likely like to pursue in the Middle East right now is completely shot. You can't arm Israel and at the same time advocate for democracy, but arm Israel to continue the occupation of the Palestinians.
Ramiz, I'd like to get into Israel is a liberal democracy, and therefore the United States can arm or support liberal democracies and not tyrants. And we know that the United States is also doing a lot of business with Egypt and Saudi Arabia.
Some of the most tyrannical regimes as well. The United States foreign policy has never been based on morality or on whether or not a country is a democracy. The United States foreign policy is based on strict interest. It's in the United States' interest to have an outpost in the Middle East. That loyal outpost has been Israel. With respect to this argument that Israel is a liberal democracy, I agree. If you're Jewish, if you're an Arab or a Palestinian living in Israel, you're treated as a second-class citizen. You can't live in certain neighborhoods. You can't rent certain properties. You are denied certain rights.
Gentlemen, we will get back to this. We have to take a break now to take a look at Mosaic, and we'll be back and we'll get your answer. Amichai, we are out of time, I'm afraid, but do stay with us. We will return with our guests in just 30 minutes to take more of your phone calls and your emails. Be sure to tell your friends about this program. You can also watch it streamed on our website at linktv.org/Mosaic. There you'll also find hundreds of episodes of Mosaic news coverage going back to before the Iraq War began. And while you're there, you can sign up for the Mosaic Intelligence Report blog with daily postings by Jamal, Dajani, and other Link TV staff. You'll find it at linktv.org/MIR_blog. Welcome back to this Mosaic special report. I'm your host, Stewart Cheifet. What you just saw was an overview of some of the television coverage in the Middle East over the past 24 hours. These programs are viewed by some 280 million people, and as you may have noticed, it is considerably different from the television coverage we see here in the United States. To help explain and understand the various perspectives on the current Middle East conflict, I'm joined again by our panel of experts. First of all, Link TV's media analyst, Jamal Dajani, also producer of the program you just watched, Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Also with us, Amichai Magen. He is a Fulbright scholar at Stanford University and former legal advisor to the Israeli government. Also with us, Ramiz Rafeedie. He's also an attorney. He is president of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. Our panelists are here to help answer your questions. The phone number to call in to ask a question is 866-848-0831. You can also email questions to us. The address for your questions live at linktv.org. Gentlemen, I want to pick up with another story that just sort of came online this afternoon. Number one, 9 Israeli soldiers killed in southern Lebanon. Kind of economic chaos in Haifa pretty much shut down. I want to ask you, Amichai, there was also a suggestion that the strong popular support for Israel's action may be weakening a bit in Israel. Do you sense that?
Well, let's remember that a poll that was released only yesterday indicated extremely high levels of public support for this operation, not because Israeli citizens want this. They didn't ask for it, but they got it, and they feel that this is a war not over some foreign land, but this is a war for their lives and for their homes. And I don't expect, if I recall, the poll indicated 90% public support for this operation, which is interesting because it would also include a very substantial proportion of the Israeli Arab population, which is also tragically being affected by the bombardment by Hezbollah. So we see very, very unusually high levels of support for this, and I don't expect this to diminish anytime soon because Israelis understand that we have no choice.
But we know out of experience from the previous Lebanese war, when Israelis are under attack, initially you have major support. And as the events stretch and the war of attrition continues, that support dwindles. I mean, we're getting into the third week now.
Absolutely.
And, you know, what's going to happen a month or 2 months from now?
Yeah, I think that you raised two critical points. One is that it is in the interest of Hezbollah to turn this war into a low-intensity conflict, a war of attrition, to drag the Israelis into Lebanon, to exact the kind of cost to the lives of our kids who are 18 and 19 years old and are serving in the army. And we tragically lost 9 of them today. This is exactly what Hezbollah wants, and this is what Israel doesn't want. Israel says, we're going to change the rules, and we're going to make sure that Hezbollah does not continue to constitute the type of strategic threats that it created. And the second point that I think you raise, and we've touched upon this before, is that we need to put pressure, therefore, on Syria. We need to put pressure on Iran to put an ending to this conflict, to stop the supply of munitions to Hezbollah, to stop allowing weapons to reach Hezbollah, so that we can put an end to this conflict sooner rather than later.
All right, I want to find out a little, I'm sorry, very briefly, and then we're going to go to Lebanon.
You know, for a nation that doesn't want a war, we're hearing a lot of bellicose statements coming out of Israel, talking about turning back the clock 20 years. They're all in Lebanon. Lebanon is full of targets. There's widespread support for this war. This was a pre-planned invasion. The capturing of this soldier in Israel sparked a pre-planned invasion by Israel to exact heavy tolls on the civilian population in Lebanon to pressure the Lebanese and Syrian governments to rein in Hezbollah. It's not going to work.
I think that's unfounded, if I may. Very briefly. Look, the last thing that Israel wanted is the opening of a second flank on its northern borders. This is why Israel withdrew 6 years ago to internationally recognized borders. This is why Israel has tolerated so many provocations by Hezbollah in the past. Let's not forget, this is not the first time that Hezbollah invaded Israel and killed the soldiers. But in the atmosphere that was created, and with the growing strategic threat of Hezbollah, Israel just didn't have a choice. It had to react.
I want to go now. We have someone on the phone with us in Beirut. It is Dahr Jamail. He is an independent journalist. You can read his dispatches actually daily at dahrjamailiraq.com. Dahr, are you there?
I am, thank you.
All right, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, exactly where in Lebanon are you, Dahr?
I am in the Hanamura district of Beirut.
And what's the situation there? Just kind of describe what's going on the ground at this moment.
Well, in Beirut, it really depends on where you are. Here in the Hanamura district, for example, there hasn't been any bombings, thankfully. But not too far from here is the Dajani district, which is approximately 25% of that district has been leveled to the ground, despite the fact that most people who live there, over 500,000 people live there, and have long since fled. But still, just about daily, it is being bombed from time to time. And there's only been 2 days so far in the conflict that neighborhood has not been bombed. But it depends on where you are in Beirut, and then of course if you go anywhere south of Beirut like I did yesterday, the destruction is extremely widespread the further south you go.
Dahr, is there a sense among the Lebanese people that sort of nobody around the rest of the world is paying attention? Is there criticism of the UN, of the U.S., that people don't seem to be taking this seriously around the world?
Well, absolutely, and that was highlighted by Condoleezza Rice's recent visit, where I wrote a story on it, and the prevalent opinion is basically, why did she even come? She isn't interested in peace. She's only been interested in protecting the interests of Israel, because she doesn't want to uphold this ceasefire that the government of Lebanon is calling for on a daily basis.
What are people doing who are in the areas which are being attacked? Are they fleeing the country? If so, where are they going?
Yes, people are fleeing. That's, of course, the natural response. We have at least 900,000 people now in this country, roughly 20% of the population that are displaced from their homes. So people from the south are going, from the villages are going to the bigger cities of Sidon and Tyre, running for their lives, sometimes literally on foot, because as they're fleeing villages, they're still being bombed by Israeli warplanes. This is a very tragic story that I've been hearing over and over. And then once they get to Sidon and Tyre, they try to make their way to Beirut. Same situation, because most of the roads have been cut. So many bridges, at least 64 bridges, have been bombed by Israeli warplanes. And then once they get to Beirut, they're trying to get to the northern border, most commonly, and either get to Syria, so then they can get to Damascus and try to get flights out, which is what I saw happening in Damascus before I came into Beirut. So anyone who can really, most people I should say, are trying to leave, but there are some who are staying simply because either can't afford to leave or don't have any other options.
Dahr, this is Jamal. I hope you're safe. How are you doing, and how are you holding there?
It is okay. Actually, after working for 8 months in Baghdad, this is an easy place to work by comparison, because at least at this point I don't have to worry about kidnappings, and it is pretty easy to move around. And as I said, the Hanamura district of Beirut, much like several of the other districts, is relatively safe. It hasn't been bombed yet. It is food and water are available. So in that aspect, it's okay. But whenever I've been to southern Beirut or south of Beirut, it is very, very tense, very dangerous, because still nobody has any idea when the next bombs will fall.
I've been reading and seeing a lot of issues on television debated about many people with foreign passports are given the preferential treatment, and it's causing some resentment in Beirut, that they can get to leave, or go to hospitals and getting some assistance. Is there basis to these allegations?
Very much so. In fact, that's been a kind of touchstone of anger when I talk to people about this, because daily here in Beirut, we can sit here and watch the foreign warships come in and out of the port with their landing craft and sometimes helicopters taking foreign nationals away. And the public sentiment about that is, well, look, just like the international community is only concerned with its own citizens, they're not concerned with the Lebanese. They'll take them away and leave us here under the bomb. So without a doubt, this is causing a lot of anger, and people feel very betrayed, particularly by the United States, because it should be, I think it's important that people know that so many Lebanese feel that they held out a lot of hope in the United States, and then to see this totally 100% backing from the United States of the Israeli policy, ignoring Lebanese pleas for a ceasefire, ignoring any pleas from the Lebanese government at this point, and then they feel very insulted by Condoleezza Rice leaving here offering a $30 million aid package when the infrastructure damage is now estimated to be at just about $2 billion. So all of these things together have really contributed to where the Lebanese feel very, very isolated. That's definitely the predominant feeling now, is that people here just don't feel that really there's any country in the world that really cares about what's happening to the Lebanese people.
What about the debate between the Lebanese debate, the ones that criticized Nasrallah and Hezbollah, and when the first bombing started, and now they're changing their mind and blaming Israel? How is that opinion been changing?
Well, that is in fact happening, because without a doubt, I mean, Lebanon is a very complex country. So many of the Christians here have been opposed to Hezbollah, their presence here from the very beginning. Many of the Druze, you could say the same thing, and some of the Sunni Muslim here as well. But as the bombs started to fall on Lebanon, and particularly with the ferocity of the Israeli response, with hitting all the infrastructure, bombing a milk plant, bombing a food plant, bombing grain silos, bombing the electricity, the water, oil storage tanks, people immediately started to change. And I actually also did recently a story on this, and I went into the Christian neighborhoods and a little bit into the Druze areas and asked people, and almost 100% of the people said that really the Israeli response has been ridiculously extreme. And many people even expressed that now we feel like we have to rely on Hezbollah to try to protect us, because this response is continuing and there's no end in sight.
Dahr, we have our viewers asking us questions, and I want to take advantage of your being on the line in Beirut. Can we go to Scott in Ohio for your question, Scott?
Yeah, this is Scott in Ohio. How are you?
Okay, go ahead, ask your question, please, and address it to Dahr.
Okay, I was just curious. The Lebanese people are so distraught about what's going on. Why aren't they getting Hezbollah out to where Israel can get to them? I mean, because it makes sense if you get rid of the problem. I mean, Israel's not shooting rockets into the other country. They're living peacefully. They're always having to get blown up. You know, if that was America, we wouldn't settle for that. The world's crying about Hezbollah, Hamas, all these other fanatic religious groups. Once the problem is gone, there is no more problem, correct?
All right, thank you. Dahr, is there resentment against Hezbollah? Is there blame being thrown that way?
There's really not, and the idea that the Lebanese government has any power to get rid of Hezbollah is really rather uninformed, because you need to understand that the Lebanese government is extremely divided within itself. There's so many different groups. It's kind of akin to the government that has been set up in Iraq by the United States, where it's based right along sectarian lines. So when people vote, they vote right along those sectarian lines. So at the end of the day, this government here in Lebanon, from almost the very beginning, hasn't really been unified, and really simply doesn't have the power to control Hezbollah. In fact, another big problem is that the Lebanese military has always been extremely weak. This is in large part because it hasn't had international funding, unlike the military in Israel that gets billions of dollars a year from the U.S. government. So the Lebanese government, 40,000 strong, really doesn't have hardly any technology. They have a couple of old Vietnam-era beat-up helicopters, and they just wouldn't have the power to get rid of Hezbollah. And then they have a government behind that that really doesn't have any power to make a unified decision towards that matter. So the Lebanese government, the Lebanese people particularly, are 100% powerless to do anything about Hezbollah, and asking them to do so is really kind of a ridiculous proposition. The only way that would happen is if there was international support, people that would come in and take some of the requests from the Lebanese government. But even on that matter, the one thing the Lebanese government is unified for right now is a call for an immediate ceasefire, and this is the exact request that the international community, particularly the U.S. and Israel, have no interest in.
All right, Dahr, thank you very much for joining us. Please stay safe there in Lebanon. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, I want to go, gentlemen, back to some email questions. And one of the points actually Jar raised there, and we've had many questions about this, and I want to get both your reactions. The argument that the Israeli response has been disproportionate to the initial activities of Hezbollah. Do you agree with that? And if you do, what do you think, Ramiz, would an appropriate, proportionate response have been?
I agree with the statement that it's disproportionate. I mean, how in the name of George Orwell can bombing bridges, bombing Red Cross ambulances, bombing right-wing radio station or television station like LBC, bombing Christian neighborhoods, bombing hospitals, lead to the self-defense of Israel? This is an attempt to exact a punishment on the civilian population to pressure them to do what Israel could not do in 20 years of occupation of southern Lebanon, and that's defeat Hezbollah. And the reason they can't do it is because Hezbollah is an organic part of Lebanon. These are not foreign fighters that are simply going to leave. These are Lebanese fighting, defending their country against an advancing rudderless army.
Yeah, I want to address this question of proportionality, because I think there are a lot of legal international law terms flying around in the air, and we need to understand what they mean. The real test here is not one of proportionality. The real test here is of necessity. And the question is, what force is necessary to stop the Hezbollah from pursuing its aggression? Now, people may have a view of Hezbollah as being a relatively weak group of fighters who are hopping around the hills of southern Lebanon. That is not the case. We need to remember that Hezbollah is not only a radical jihadist organization dedicated, religiously dedicated to the destruction of the State of Israel and of the United States, but it is also a very formidable military power. Not only has it fought a war against Israel since its establishment in 1982, but in the last 6 years, when Israel withdrew from Lebanon, it has been left to its own devices, and in fact, it's been receiving tremendous amount of moral, financial, military support from Iran and Syria. And so it now possesses a huge arsenal of weaponry that, as you see, has paralyzed the northern third of the State of Israel. And so to come and say that what Israel is trying to do in this operation is to put an end to Hezbollah's ability to terrorize the State of Israel and to drag the rest of the Middle East into a wider conflict, which is precisely what the Iranians and the Syrians want. And the reason why you see the bombardment of infrastructure, the bombardment of roads, is because Hezbollah has effectively built a state within a state in Lebanon. It is using civilian infrastructure. It is using women and children and civilian houses to shoot these missiles from. And the Israeli response has therefore been to try to knock that out.
I want to get back to Ramiz. You agreed with my statement, or the statement of some, that the Israeli response was disproportionate. I wanted you to answer the second part of the question. What, in your mind, would have been an appropriate, proportionate response?
To do exactly what Israel has done in the past, as early as 2 years ago, and that's to negotiate a prisoner swap with Hezbollah. Let's not forget the context, the larger context that this is in. There are at least 3 Lebanese prisoners languishing in Israeli prisons, one of them whom has been in there for 28 years. Hezbollah and Israel negotiated a prisoner release 2 years ago. The last minute of that prisoner release, Israel balked. They said, we're keeping 3 guys back. Nasrallah warned Israel then and 2 months ago that this is going to lead to something we have to do. We have to force our hand. We have to get our prisoners back. So Israel has done it in the past. They have negotiated with Hezbollah indirectly. They could have done it this time, but it's not in their interest to do it this time. This time, the intent was to make an example out of Lebanon. Unfortunately, the civilians are paying the price. And if anything good comes out of this, if at all, it's that it lays waste to this myth of a purity of arms in Israel or a moral army. It certainly is not.
We'll get back to this issue in just a moment. We have to take a very short break. We'll be back in just a moment with more of our discussion on the crisis in the Middle East.
Is this the Iraq War you never see on American TV? Unfiltered, uncensored, unafraid to venture into uncharted territory? Now you can play an important role in keeping this Peabody Award-winning news digest on the air, delivering cutting-edge news from the Middle East. Become a member of the Mosaic Club today. From the basic membership to the producer circle, each level comes with unique gifts and privileges, including the Mosaic tote bag, and a weekly subscription to the Mosaic Intelligence Report, an e-letter highlighting the week's events in the region. Some members will receive a DVD of Occupied Minds, a journey into the heart of Israel and Palestine, or will recognize your important role by putting your name in the show credits. Some memberships include a tour of Link TV studios in San Francisco, invitations to special events, and lunch with Mosaic's producer. Join the Mosaic team. Help keep critical news from the Middle East on the air. Just log on to www.linktv.org/Mosaic Club to learn how you can join the Mosaic Club today.
All right, and welcome back to our program here, and we're going to continue our discussion. You were talking before, Amichai, about destroying Hezbollah. Many people say that's simply not possible. How do you destroy that group? Is that really the goal, or is it some sort of weakening of Hezbollah? I mean, there's an argument that that simply will not happen.
Well, I don't want to second-guess the intelligence that the United States has at its disposal, the intelligence that Israel has at its disposal. What I will say is that today we heard from the president of Iran that he's asking for a ceasefire, and I doubt that he's concerned about the loss of Israeli and Lebanese civilian life. We also saw in the last 24 hours a drastic reduction in the number of Hezbollah rockets being shot into northern Israel, whereas I believe 24 hours ago we saw up to 160 rockets hitting Israeli towns. In the last 24 hours, I think that number has been reduced significantly. So I think that the Israelis are making headway. I hope that they will do so swiftly. I hope that they will do so while minimizing the disruption to the lives of the Lebanese public. And then we need to begin to think seriously about the day after, because that's what really matters.
Amichai, you're talking about a scenario repeating itself. 1982, people will argue the reason Hezbollah was founded is because of Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. Now we have the Israeli army in southern Lebanon. Many analysts are talking about that system of Bismarckian warfare is dead. You cannot fight with Hezbollah based on that Bismarck strategy. You know, you're talking about guerrilla warfare, and you're talking about the state. So at the end of the day, Israel is going to go there. They're going to maybe quiet Hezbollah for a while, but you're not talking about the long-term strategy that Hezbollah is not going to be back. They're entrenched within the Lebanese fiber. It's not a long-term solution. We're talking about a long-term solution.
It is not a long-term solution. And the sooner the Israelis are able to safely get out, they would want to get out, and we should all help them to get out. And the way to do that is, A, to sufficiently weaken Hezbollah at the moment so as to remove the threat from the northern third of the State of Israel, and then to work out a diplomatic solution, possibly an international force that will come into southern Lebanon and that will prevent Hezbollah from coming to the border and continuing its aggression against Israel. That's what we need to strive for.
I want to go to another viewer phone call. Emily's on the line in Texas. Emily, what's your question, please?
Thank you for your time. My question: why is the world so quick to recognize world crimes against humanity, such as Kosovo, Hussein's Iraq, and World War II Germany, but when it comes to Israel, the world leaders turn a blind eye? Is this the result of infectious Zionism?
Amichai, why don't you answer that?
I think that there are a number of assumptions in your questions that simply don't make any sense. I mean, you assume war crimes. We saw the news footage from Arab countries accusing Israel of all sorts of terrible things. This is part of an international attempt by some to demonize, dehumanize, and delegitimize the State of Israel. And I find that extremely disturbing. Because in our history, as the Jewish people, we know that the first step towards genocide, the first step towards undermining the existence of a people, is to accuse it of wild crimes and to dehumanize it. And I think that is wild talk, and that is dangerous talk. It is not an international crime to defend yourself. That is why we have the UN Charter, and we have Article 52 of the UN Charter, which allows states that have been subjected to an armed attack to take defensive measures. And that is what Israel is doing. What is an international crime is to use civilian populations and use civilian infrastructure to wage war against your enemy. That is a violation of international humanitarian law, and it must be stopped.
Listen, the answer to the caller's question is relatively simple. The reason that Israel is immune from being held on charges of violating international law is because Israel has a very capable and powerful attorney in the United Nations. That's the United States. Last week, 10 nations in the Security Council voted to condemn Israel and ask for an immediate ceasefire. 4 nations abstained. 1 nation voted no. The 1 nation, of course, is the United States. And once again, the United States finds itself on the wrong side of history on this issue. Israel, despite the tragedies of the Jewish people, Israel is not immune from rational and sustained criticism. If they are committing war crimes, their leaders and their people should be held accountable to that, and rational, justice-loving people should speak out against it without the fear of being labeled anti-Semitic or wanting to...
We have someone on the line in Israel right now, and we want to get the side of the story of what's going on in that region. Yitzhak, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm on the line.
All right, this is Yitzhak Beer. He lives sort of right in the line of fire in the village of Galil, which is about 7 miles south of the Lebanese-Israeli border. Is that where you are right now, Yitzhak?
Well, I'm now in Jerusalem. I escaped from the noise and from the Katyusha force. I escaped to my brother's house, and we will spend the weekend with him and his family in his house. And so we are kind of a refugee now because we are suffering a long time of Katyusha bombs and Katyusha force. And also the noise of the guns of Israel from the border. It's a big noise in our village.
I understand. I understand, Yitzhak. Actually, you were just within 10 seconds of getting hit by a missile. Is that correct?
Yes, I have an experience, and very frightened experience, when Katyusha fall about 100 meters before my car and on the road. And yes, I feel like I am in Russian roulette. You know, a few seconds ahead. If I would hurry about a few seconds, I can be hit by the Katyusha.
Yitzhak, so, you live in the area, I believe, where the original soldier who was captured in Gaza, where his family lives. Do you know his parents?
Also, we are neighbor of this family. We know very well this soldier, Gilad Shalit, his name, and it's another item or another issue in this fight against the Palestinian terror. It's very hard for the family. The family is actually almost broken by this event. Of course, it's very hard for them. And also for us, we are a small community in the Galilee of Israel, and we are trying to support them as much as we can, but it's not easy.
Yes.
What can you do when all the diplomatic and all the efforts to release him does not work?
Were you surprised, Yitzhak, by the intensity of the Israeli response to the capturing of the soldiers initially? I mean, we've just been discussing, was that response of the Israeli army appropriate?
Yes. I listened to what was told before me. We must push the Hezbollah from the border. There is no other way. They sit there and they attack our houses, our villages and kibbutzes, and whenever they want to. And this is not acceptable situation, you know. No independent country would agree with that. It is not acceptable. You can't allow it. No country can allow it. So we must push them, and they are very good equipped, and and they give us a very good fight. And but when they send word to the civilian villages, civilian citizens, they are sitting in the house, in the villages, in the cities. They are launching missiles from the houses.
All right, Yitzhak, thank you very much. I'm afraid we're out of time. Stay safe there in Jerusalem, and thanks for your help.
Thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you. Gentlemen, let's go back to some of the things he was talking about. Is there some vision of how this is going to end? I mean, we hope this is not going to go on forever. You're smart guys, you're lawyers. If you were involved, you've been involved in the Camp David process, for example, Amichai, where do you begin? I mean, it seems such a complicated situation with so many parties.
Yeah, I think that we must begin with some very concrete results that we should strive to achieve as soon as possible. And that is that there must be one government in Lebanon, there must be one army in Lebanon, there must be what is commonly called in international relations a monopoly of the means of violence. There needs to be Lebanese sovereignty over the whole of Lebanon. So by definition, there cannot be militias, there cannot be terrorist groups that use Lebanese soil to launch attacks against neighboring states. We need to start with that. So can we completely dismantle Hezbollah in the next 2 or 3 weeks? I don't think that is realistic. But what we must insist on, so that we don't find ourselves in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months down the line going through exactly the same tit for tat, we must insist on the effective disarmament of Hezbollah. We must insist on preventing Syria and Iran from resupplying Hezbollah with munitions. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in the same spot. Then we need to start talking about a wider diplomatic solution. And I'm sure my colleagues will have some ideas about that.
Just before Ramiz continues, something struck me here about Yitzhak's story. He mentioned that he was a refugee in Israel, and which I find it very, very profound now, an Israeli talking about a refugee within Israel, when you have a huge problem with Palestinian refugees within the state of, between the state of Israel, Gaza, the West Bank. How is Israel going to address this problem that has been lingering for 60 years by now?
Well, Israel has, at the moment, around 650,000 people that have been displaced by this fighting. For a country of 6.6 million people, this is a large number of people. I don't know what would be the U.S. equivalent. So we have a problem, a real humanitarian problem of a large number of people who are internally displaced in the state of Israel. To answer your question in its more historical context...
But you know that they're, at some point, they're going to go back to their homes. And I want to be specific about the Palestinians that are living within the state of Israel, even Israeli citizens that have been displaced from their own villages and live just a couple of miles away from their home. Will they be allowed to return to their homes?
Well, we have a situation where, as a result of several wars, the 1948 war, the 1967 war, we've had many thousands of refugees on both sides. Let's not forget that when the State of Israel was created anew in 1948, many Arab countries evicted their Jewish population and so made them into refugees. And so Israel absorbed a huge number of refugees into the State of Israel. Unfortunately, Arab countries, as a result of that war, and again as a result of the 1967 war, did not offer Palestinians rights and a home. And they're being kept deliberately in refugee camps in order to fester.
Well, we're short on time, and I want to just try to get one more viewer question if we can. Malcolm in California, what's your question, please?
I would like to know what type of repercussions this could have throughout the international community, and more particularly throughout the Middle East.
You kind of alluded to that earlier, Ramiz. What are the big international implications of what's going on?
There are implications for the United States. The United States has lost any remaining credibility it has in the Arab world, and it was very little to begin with by its knee-jerk unconditional support for this Israeli aggression. On an international level, the Arab regimes, these so-called moderate regimes that condemned Hezbollah for the operation, they are teetering on the brink if they continue to go against their masses. The popular will in the Arab world is that Hezbollah is a legitimate resistance organization, and that to defeat Hezbollah, you have to defeat the reasons for Hezbollah's very existence. The Arab people understand that, the Arab leaders don't. That's going to be a major problem. And there is also the prospect for a wider regional conflict if Israel were to attack Syria or Iran.
Jamal, we have about 30 seconds left. Your final thoughts on this issue?
Well, I think, we're just seeing the first stage of in this battle, and I don't see a quick solution for it, but it looks like Hezbollah, from what I've been monitoring from the Hezbollah statements and from even the Lebanese, they are not going to acquiesce and accept disarming, and Lebanon is not going to be capable. The Lebanese government will not be able to disarm them, and we're going to be back to square one and back to the negotiations for the soldiers. Now, I don't know what is the Israeli position on this, but it seems that we are looking for at least two more weeks of hostilities before negotiations begin.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid we are out of time. I want to thank you very, very much. Ramiz Rafeedie, Amichai Magen, and of course Jamal Dajani. A very worthwhile discussion. I appreciate your coming here. If you didn't catch all of this program, by the way, or some of the other shows in this special series, you can see them streamed on our website at linktv.org/Mosaic. There you'll also find hundreds of episodes of Mosaic, world news from the Middle East, with full coverage of how this crisis has developed from day one. Also be sure to tune in each day to Link TV for live updates and special documentaries that explain the history and context of this conflict. Thanks for joining us. For Link TV, I'm Stewart Cheifet.
This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.